Tim Henman's Wimbledon semi-final continues on BBC One now. So here on BBC Two, the news at 6 o'clock with Sian Williams.
A former Conservative cabinet minister calls for cannabis to be sold over the counter. Peter Lilly says the current law is unenforceable and indefensible. The teenage hacker who put credit card details on the web escapes jail. Fighting for a place in the final, Tim Henman's just won the second set. A row over royal finances as the family firm debates new guidelines. And coming up in UK Today, severe criticism for an NHS trust that ran up a £10 million deficit. Members of the Scottish Parliament reported serious management failures.
This is BBC One in London and the South East. Now the news with George Alagaya, Sophie Rayworth and Emily Makeless.
At 6 o'clock, these are tonight's top stories. The heat's on Iraq, a quarter of the British army's being sent to the Gulf. Police find a stun gun and CS gas inside a London mosque. And the Liverpool man forced to flee Britain to end his life legally.
Tonight, we're live in Baghdad for the reaction to that news that Britain is sending 26,000 troops to the Gulf. And here, Richard Bilton is with the firefighters of Redcar as the clock ticks towards tomorrow's fire strike.
Tonight on BBC London News, sleeping on the job, the tube maintenance workers who cost us millions. And does the congestion charge infringe our human rights? Protesters launch a late appeal.
Good evening and welcome to the 6 o'clock news.
The news now on BBC One with George Alagaya, Sophie Rayworth and Assad Ahmed.
At 6 o'clock, a Tory blueprint for the economy. The Letwin formula, more for schools and hospitals, but cuts elsewhere. Did the wrong women come off HRT? New questions about the medical advice. The biggest civil service strike for more than a decade. Job centres and benefits offices are closed.
Tonight, the motorists hogging disabled parking spaces, why more and more disabled customers are finding there's no room for them at the supermarket. We report from the Netherlands, where there's such a shortage of teachers, A-level students are having to step in.
I think I can teach them a lot because I'm closer to them than a normal teacher.
And head first at 85 miles an hour, we'll meet the man they call Dr. Ice, the first Brit to win the Bob Skeleton World Cup.
Tonight on BBC London News, Go West, the drive to push the boundaries of the congestion zone draws strong opposition. And a shortage of midwives puts newborn babies at risk during childbirth.
Good evening, welcome to the 6 o'clock news.
The news now on BBC One with George Alagaya, Natasha Kaplinsky and Riz Latif.
At 6 o'clock, fighting back, Tony Blair tries to rally his party.
The Prime Minister says people should look at the big picture.
With just 2 days to go before the local elections, he tells voters, remember what Labour has done.
But 9 days' headlines should not obscure 9 years of achievement.
Also on tonight's programme,
fears of rigging in this week's voting, police will guard polling stations in the Midlands.
Unrepentant and in denial, convicted paedophile Gary Glitter still insists he did nothing wrong.
The scourge of world hunger, a new report says 15,000 children are dying every day.
Wayne's World Cup, England's star striker says he'll be doing everything it takes to play this summer.
Tonight on BBC London News, firefighters vote to strike, but the government says no to army emergency cover. And saving his life, the engineer who repaired an operating theatre moments before a heart attack.
Good evening and welcome to the 6 o'clock.
Now on BBC One, the news with George Alagaya, Natasha Kaplinsky and Riz Latif.
At 6 o'clock, terror on the tube, the moment an alleged bomber tried to blow up an underground train.
A court hears of the shock, fear and panic among the passengers who are locked into the same carriage.
CCTV footage shows Ramzi Mohammed on the train. The prosecution says the rucksack contained the bomb that failed.
Also on tonight's programme, is Britain's favourite supermarket getting too big? As £1 in £3 spent on food is spent in Tesco, are smaller shops being driven out of business?
Yesterday it was a free-for-all. Today organised gangs are looting on Branscombe Beach.
The Catholic Church ultimatum will close down our adoption agencies if new gay right laws apply.
The great white that bit off more than it could chew, and the diver who survived to tell the tale.
The diver's had the presence of mind to poke it in the eyes, and it was eventually spat out.
And British actresses dominate the Oscar race as Dame Helen Mirren, Dame Judi Dench and Kate Winslet go head-to-head.
On BBC London, the funding row overshadowing the 2012 days to go until the London Olympics. And clear up or clear off, Westminster threatens a ban on the distribution of free newspapers.
Good evening and welcome to the 6 o'clock news.
This is BBC One. Now the BBC News with George Alagaya and Riz Latif.
At 6 o'clock, Gordon Brown backs down over the 10p tax row. There'll be compensation for the young and the old. Labour rebels have forced the Prime Minister into a major U-turn. The Tories say he's a loser, not a leader.
We were told there would be no back down. We've had a back down. We were told he couldn't rewrite the budget. He's rewriting the budget. We were told there'd be no concessions. There are now massive concessions.
Also on tonight's programme, school's out. A third of all classrooms are hit as teachers prepare for their first national strike in more than 20 years. Is this Britain's most expensive petrol station? That's right, £1.30 a litre of diesel. I put it up, I'll tear it down. How one builder dealt with a customer who wouldn't pay up for a new conservatory.
On BBC London, is the Met going soft on people who use Class A drugs? We reveal the force has been issuing more cautions. And Boris Johnson answers the questions you posted on the net in our online political debate.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6.
Now on BBC One at 6 o'clock, the BBC News with Sophie Rayworth.
Heavy snow, rain and high winds bring major disruption to much of the UK. Spring has sprung, but winter's not done as blizzards sweep in, causing problems on roads, rail and at airports.
The snow came down quickly here in West Yorkshire. We've got around 5 to 6 inches. We've now got strong winds and blizzard-like conditions, and more snow is on the way.
Ice and falling trees bring down cables, leaving tens of thousands of homes in Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland without power. But it's flooding causing problems in Devon and Cornwall. A woman's been found dead after her home collapsed around her. With more heavy snow falling tonight, we'll have the latest situation across the United Kingdom. Also tonight, more protests in Cyprus as the government urges MPs to save the island from financial ruin. Cash to come to Britain. Immigrants from some countries should pay a deposit, says Nick Clegg, and they'll get it back when they leave. And newly released documents reveal the tensions between Margaret Thatcher and her cabinet in the run-up to the Falklands War.
On BBC London, it's official. West Ham will move into the Olympic Stadium. Have they scored the deal of the century? And Basildon Hospital's accused of covering up its death rates. We have an exclusive report.
Good evening. Welcome to the BBC News at 6.
Now on BBC One, the 6 o'clock news with Sophie Rayworth.
At 6, the government's long-term plans for social care and the NHS in England. Pressure grows on the Prime Minister ahead of an expected announcement tomorrow. But how will it be paid for? There's a growing Tory backlash amid reports of plans to raise national insurance to fund the changes. This man's mother had to go into residential care. He was forced to sell the family home to pay for it.
That's when you start to realise that the money that they've got saved and the money that my mum would get as well just was going to go nowhere near paying for the costs that were needed.
We'll be asking what options the government has to fund changes to the system. Also tonight, millions of children are back at school in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. No masks and no class bubbles. Raising the Taliban flag as the last remaining part of Afghanistan falls after days of heavy fighting. Spotted by a police helicopter, a 3-year-old boy missing since Friday in the Australian bush is found in a gully. And India cruised to a comfortable win against England in the 4th test at the Oval.
On BBC London, hit hardest and recovering slowly, how to improve employment in London post-pandemic. And researchers find air pollution could affect how badly people suffer from COVID.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6.
Now on BBC One, Rita Chakrabarti with the BBC News at 6.
Today at 6, Gary Lineker is forced to step back from presenting Match of the Day by the BBC for his comments on the government's immigration policy. The presenter was told there has to be a clear and agreed position on his use of social media before he can return. The pundit Ian Wright has said he now won't appear on this Saturday's programme in solidarity with Lineker. We'll bring you all the latest, also on the programme. Immigration also key at a meeting in Paris where the UK promises France £500 million to deal with illegal channel crossing.
Today, we've taken our cooperation to an unprecedented level to tackle this shared challenge.
The inside story of how a gang stole £10 million of taxpayers' money that should have been used to help small businesses during COVID. Drivers are stuck for hours overnight after snow in some parts of the UK causes disruption on the roads.
Never fighting, but it always wins.
And the music from small-town America that's now booming in the UK.
On BBC London, putting victims at the heart of policing, the Met launches a new helpline as it looks to rebuild trust.
Good evening.
Now on BBC One, Rita Chakrabarti with the BBC News at 6.
Today at 6, the husband of the former First Minister of Scotland is arrested as police investigate the Scottish National Party's finances. Peter Murrell, seen here with his wife Nicola Sturgeon, was chief executive of the party. He resigned last month. Police carried out searches at the couple's house in Glasgow, as well as at a number of other properties. Also on the programme tonight. There should be more compensation for the relatives of people infected through contaminated NHS blood treatments, says the public inquiry. Convicted after the largest ever child sex abuse case investigated by West Midlands Police. In all, 21 people have been found guilty. And no longer Queen Consort. The official invitation to the King's coronation names her as Queen Camilla.
And on BBC London, Easter staffing and a doctor's strike within days. Will our hospitals cope? And controversial views. Andrew Tate's impact on London's teenagers.
Good evening.